Hey, Crossing Church, my name's RJ, and I'm the student pastor here at the Crossing. We're in the sermon series called Aesthetic, where we're looking at what is underneath and how we can grow, shape, and change our lives so that we can look more and more like Jesus. Today's message and story centers around this idea of perseverance. For those unfamiliar with the term, perseverance is defined as the persistence in doing something despite difficulty or delay in achieving success. Growing up, I used to work a variety of jobs, but one of the most unique and challenging jobs was collections for Honda. My job consisted of sitting on a headset, talking to people, and figuring out ways for them to catch up on their car payments. And what started as another job soon became a daily test of resolve and empathy. I often felt like quitting this job. The weight of people's hardships, coupled with constant tension between corporate demands and human compassion, was almost unbearable. I encountered a variety of situations, from struggling parents to make ends meet, to angry individuals yelling and blaming me for their car payments being months behind. Till this day, I still have nightmares of some of the things that people would tell me over the phone. And on top of that, the pressure to perform was relentless. Every morning when I arrived at work, I would find an email from my boss waiting in my inbox. The email contained a detailed breakdown of my performance from the previous day, as well as how I stacked up against my colleagues in the collections department. Ultimately, it was just a constant reminder of the corporate pressure of this emotionally taxing job. I worked in collections for about a year, and the experience left a lasting impact on me. Most days, I would leave work with a knot in my stomach, questioning whether I was truly helping people or just adding to their misery. There were countless times where I found myself with shaking hands, staring mindlessly at the computer screen, just feeling overwhelmed of this emotional toll that this job took. And despite these moments of doubt and distress, I kept telling myself I couldn't quit. Whether it was the financial necessity, a sense of obligation, or the hope that I can make a positive difference, something compelled me to push through the discomfort and continue facing the challenging calls day after day. And maybe like yourself, when I think of perseverance, I think of a word that's most often associated with the idea of not giving up. We often see perseverance in popular songs like Eye of the Tiger or Don't Stop Believing. It's portrayed in inspiring movies like 127 Hours or even the Rocky series. Even company slogans like Nike's famous Just Do It reinforce this message. But ultimately, we live in a world that constantly encourages us to keep going no matter the obstacles we face. But then the obstacle hits and reality strikes. The initial surge of motivation begins to wane as we confront the complexity of real-life challenges. Maybe the obstacle you faced have been financial stresses that have become overwhelming. Bills pile up, unexpected expenses arise, and the cost of living seems to increase faster than our income. Maybe it's the lack of recognition or the advancement of work becomes frustrating as we question whether the problem lies within the company or maybe we're just not performing the way that we should. Maybe it's the strain on a relationship that feels insurmountable. Communication breaks down, small disagreements escalate into major conflicts, and the emotional distance between you and your significant other seems to grow wider by the day. The reality of persistent and complex challenges test ourselves in ways that catchy songs, movies, or motivational speeches don't really prepare us for. These obstacles and challenges may even lead some of us to decisions that compromise who we are and what we believe in. Situations like the ones I mentioned above make me want to ask, how do we persevere in a world where we are constantly going through challenges? Again, the purpose of the series is seeing how we can grow, shape, and change our lives so that we can look more and more like Jesus. And with that, one of my favorite people that provides us with a phenomenal template is Daniel. Daniel exemplifies one of Jesus' key attributes, perseverance. And throughout his life, Daniel faced numerous trials and challenges, yet he remained consistent in his faith. His unwavering commitment to God, despite adversity, serves as a powerful example for us today. And we get to see one of the most famous illustrations of Daniel's life, which is when Daniel went into the lion's den. While commonly shared as a children's Sunday school story, this story provides a strong message of perseverance that is applicable for all ages. So let's turn our Bible to Daniel chapter 6, and if you have the Crossing app, you can follow along there as well. So let's move right into the story. In Daniel 6:16 to 17, it says, "So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, 'May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you.' A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the ring of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed." Now, you might be wondering and scratching your head about how Daniel got himself in this situation in the first place. So here's some important things you need to know about Daniel and the situation. The first thing to note is that Daniel was exiled. Some years before this, Daniel and others were taken from their home and being forced to exile to this foreign land called Babylon, where they knew nothing about. And when he arrived at this new land, he was then told that his name was going to change. He had to eat differently. He had to learn and embrace this Babylonian culture and believe in things and become someone that was contrary to everything he believed in. And in essence, Daniel was being forced to erase his previous identity and his way of life. He was expected to conform to a new lifestyle, set of beliefs, and regardless of his personal feelings or even his desires. And despite facing numerous challenges over the course of his life, Daniel showed remarkable resilience. He never complained or succumbed to negative emotions he likely experienced. And even though he was just repeatedly pressured to abandon his beliefs, Daniel did not compromise his faith and always remained obedient to God. And this unwavering commitment to his beliefs often put Daniel in dangerous situations, at times nearly costing him his life, like this time heading to the lion's den. However, his consistent integrity and faith ultimately worked in his favor. And surprisingly, Daniel's tenacity to remain obedient led to his advancement with the Babylonians and allowed him to work even close to all of the Babylonian kings. And in this instance, the way he ends up here in the lion's den is because of other high-ranking officials. You see, these officials were envious of Daniel's close relationship with the king and his influence on decision-making. So they devised a plan to discredit him. These officials manipulated the new king into passing a temporary law that forbade anybody from worshiping or praying to any god or any person except for the king himself for a period of 30 days. And this law was specifically designed to conflict with Daniel's religious practices because these officials knew that he would not comply since Daniel would pray to God 3 times a day. And their intent was to create a situation where Daniel's faith would put him at odds with the king's law, thereby undermining his position and potentially removing him from power and potentially Daniel's death. And like so many other times before, Daniel would do what Daniel has done, which is he doesn't give in and he remains obedient to God. He would eventually get caught in prayer and would be sent into the lion's den where we're at right now. Now, if there's anything you should know about Daniel, is that he is confident in God, which leads me to the point of sharing that Daniel's trust in God fuels his perseverance. Similar to Daniel, some of the challenges and obstacles could perhaps be compromising to who we are and what we believe in. Even further, there might even be obstacles that are getting in the way of us being the person that we are. Nevertheless, we have the ability to persevere should we have the same confidence and trust that he had in God. Daniel had this confidence in God because he was able to persevere. And the way he was able to persevere was because he was able to look back and recall all the other times God came to his rescue. And for us, something to remember here is by adding the practice of remembrance, we equip ourselves to persevere through future challenges and obstacles. What I believe is understated here in this moment is that what has taken place in Daniel's life. You see, Daniel was close to 60 years old. He was exiled to Babylon at around 15 years old. So he had at least 40 to 50 years of looking back to see how God has come alongside him during this exile. And during this time, Daniel likely had numerous opportunities to witness God's intervention and God's protection in his life. And for every trial he faced, each danger he overcame during that time became another testament to God's faithfulness. And for us, we can make the same practice of looking back to help us persevere in the future. Whether you're looking back over 40 plus years or just the last 40 seconds, when we intentionally reflect on our lives, we can identify moments where we felt God's presence and guidance, even during the challenging times. Another notable point here is that Daniel's consistency in obeying God fuels his perseverance. You see, Daniel faced a serious and life-changing dilemma. By choosing to comply with the new law and temporarily ceasing his prayers to God, he can ensure his safety and maintain his powerful position. He might have been tempted to rationalize this decision to not pray in several ways. For one, the law to worship the king was only for 30 days, which is really relatively a short time in the grand scheme of things. The comfort and influence of high-ranking positions seems too valuable for Daniel to risk losing. And then thirdly, and most importantly, Daniel valued his life and might have been reluctant to put that into jeopardy. And these considerations and these rational thinking presented a compelling case for Daniel to compromise. But for me, the one that stands out most is that the law was only for 30 days. And when it comes to perseverance, I believe we often think of overcoming larger and more significant obstacles like saving for a house or advancing in our careers, and overlook the ones that are not as large, like trying to eat healthier or starting a new routine. Like I mentioned above, 30 days of prayer is really not that long, especially if it meant saving his life and his status. I know personally there's been times where I may have not done a spiritual practice for that long. But for Daniel, it was a big deal, which is why he went forth and prayed. And by choosing to look at the smaller everyday tasks as serious as the larger ones, what we're doing unintentionally is that we're training ourselves to handle and tackle the larger and more critical challenges that life will bring. And we could become more like Daniel and persevere by remaining consistent in our smaller as well as our bigger obstacles. Now, returning back to the story, Daniel's been cast into a pit, a hole that is far from anything cozy or den-like. And within this pit, hungry lions are ready to make Daniel his next meal. The environment itself is hostile. It's likely damp, dark, and cold, adding physical discomfort to the immediate danger at hand for Daniel. And I share all this so that you know that Daniel must have been gripped by fear. His heart must have been racing, his palms sweating, his mind reeling with thoughts of his impending doom. It's a reminder, really, that even figures we consider heroic or divinely protective are just feeling and experiencing very human emotions. We all can relate to Daniel's terror on some level. While most of us may have not faced hungry lions, we have all encountered situations that seem overwhelming, where we felt vulnerable and afraid. Whether it's a daunting challenge at work, a health scare, or a personal crisis, we've all had moments where fear threatened to consume us. And I hope that Daniel's story and the rest of it remind you that courage isn't the absence of fear, but rather facing our challenges and perseverance despite our fears. And as Daniel is trying to survive, we see how King Darius, the one who sent them into the same pit, is doing in verses 18 and 19, where he says, "Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, for he couldn't sleep. And at the light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den." You see, King Darius was so concerned about Daniel's potential death that he hoped for God to protect him and even stayed up late thinking about it. We know that King Darius was hoping for God to protect him because he shares with Daniel before going into the lion's den in verse 16, "May your God, whom you serve continuously, rescue you." Although it sounds like it could have been a sarcastic goodbye, like something a villain would say to a hero in a movie, he was actually genuinely concerned with Daniel's well-being. And I share this all to make the point that our perseverance influences the people around us. And when I first started at Honda doing collections, I quickly noticed a pattern in these daily email reports. which was the same 3 or 4 names consistently appearing at the top of these rankings. These high performers excelled in securing payments from debtors, negotiating and establishing payment arrangements, and assisting customers in getting their accounts back on track. Their success both inspired and intimidated me. And observing their consistent performance ignited something within me. Because of my unique mix of just wanting to help people and being hyper competitive, I always wanted to be on the top of the list. But I also wanted to do what I could to help these people. And so this internal drive created this interesting dilemma, which was, how can I balance my desires to win with my empathy for those who were struggling? It was a daily challenge to find ways to meet my targets while also treating these people with kindness and understanding that they deserved. And the struggle to persevere ethically in a demanding role not only shaped my own approach, but also influenced the people I worked with. And as I strived to balance my performance with compassion, I noticed others around me beginning to adopt and do the same things that I was doing. And throughout the book of Daniel, we learn a lot about Daniel. He is known to have a good attitude. He's known for being honest, having high integrity, and the ability to do anything that was tasked to him. In essence, Daniel is probably one who would have been on the top of that collections list every day for about 40 to 50 years. However, unlike collections, Daniel's influence was so much greater. During his time being exiled, he served under 3 different kings. And each king had their own desires of ruling and being the best king that they could be for Babylon. Yet Daniel, who was both an incredible worker and one with strong religious convictions, managed to persuade 2 of the 3 kings he served under to acknowledge and praise his God. Daniel could have easily went the other way and conformed to the ways of these kings, but he chose to do the right thing, and time again, he influenced how these kings would rule. Daniel's perseverance in his faith and values ultimately shaped the governance and spiritual outlook of the kingdoms he served. And when it comes to us today, we have the same ability to impact the people around us. Whether it is at home with our families, the people we work with or go to school with, the decisions we make daily could potentially lead someone closer to God. It might be easier to do the status quo or to conform what others are suggesting. But like Daniel, we have the same opportunity to stand firm in our convictions and potentially influence others immensely. So if you are in a challenging situation where there are plenty of obstacles, remember that there might be someone who is watching your every move. And I share this not to put any pressure, but to encourage you that your choice to do what God calls you to do could be what helps someone that is around you looking at you. Going back to the story, after being up all night, King Darius returns to the opening of the den and cries out to Daniel in anguish and hopes that Daniel will be saved. Verses 20 to 23 specifically say, when he, the king, came near the den, he called out to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you can serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, may the king live forever. My God sent his angels, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. So verse 23, the king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. We now get to the end of the story. And there are so many things to love about this ending. Of course, the first thing is that Daniel survives. However, what gets me is Daniel's response when he is finally rescued. When King Darius anxiously calls out to Daniel, asking if his God had indeed saved him, Daniel's reply is both surprising yet revealing. Instead of immediately proclaiming God's miracle, Daniel first addresses the king with respect and honor by him saying, O king, live forever. Only after this does Daniel proceed to explain how God saved his life. And to me, this really speaks to how Daniel was both caring to others as well as his adoration to God. Even after being unjustly sentenced, Daniel maintains his respect for the king's position. And ultimately, Daniel's response and overall conduct throughout this ordeal provides a beautiful image for what perseverance is. Going back to the beginning of the message, where I talked about different ways where we're exposed to perseverance, I believe the common denominator for all those examples is that they're all about reaching a goal. Once you reach that goal, there isn't much left to do. And ultimately, there's just clear and defined endpoints to where once you hit that goal, you're done with it. But when looking at Daniel, specifically his perseverance isn't just about surviving a difficult situation, but about maintaining one's character, one's faith, and one's integrity throughout the entire obstacle or challenge. Therefore, the way we should think of perseverance is that perseverance isn't just about reaching a goal, but about maintaining and building our love and trust in God. One other way that Daniel is described in this book is that he's blameless. On the surface, it may seem that he is blameless in the sense that he is perfect, but that isn't what is meant here. Rather, in biblical terms, being blameless often refers to a person's overall character and consistent obedience to God rather than absolute perfection. Even though Daniel was flawless and perfect in this story, he wasn't always perfect. I'm sure there were challenging times where he might have done things contrary to the time in the lion's den. Even so, both God and Daniel understood his character, which was one who strived to remain obedient to God. And even in our best efforts to follow Daniel's example, we have to remember that perfection isn't the goal. What matters most is our intent and our overall pattern of obedience. And like Daniel, we're going to face our own lion's dens, situations that test us, that test our faith and our resolve. And we might not always respond with this unwavering courage that Daniel had, and that's okay. The key is to maintain a heart that seeks to honor God, even when we stumble. It's about getting back up when we fall, learning from our mistakes, and continually to stride towards righteousness. Remember, God sees our hearts and understands our struggles. He doesn't expect perfection, but rather a sincere effort to follow Him. And in our imperfect attempts to live faithfully, we can find comfort in knowing that God's grace covers our shortcomings, just as it did for Daniel and countless others throughout the Bible and in history. And so ultimately, the last thing I want to leave you with, if you need any more encouragement to persevere in your daily lives, is that a couple weeks ago, I had the honor of taking over 40 junior high and high school students to summer camp. For some of you, the thought of hanging out with 40 teenagers for 2 weeks at camp may be worse than going to a lion's den. But these 2 weeks end up always being my favorite 2 weeks of the year. And this year was special. This group connected in ways that I only dreamed were possible. During the high school camp specifically, students made commitments to support and encourage one another. For example, nearly all the girls who attended camp created this texting group chat, and they used this chat to do a 21-day devotional study together, while also helping each other stay accountable to their camp commitments. But one of my favorite things was the camp's theme, which was this idea of just resetting and looking at the rest of your life and how you should leave it. And the theme passage was Psalm 23, 1-4, which says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right path for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." Earlier in this message, I asked the question, how do we persevere in a world where we are constantly going through challenges? To better persevere in a world where we are constantly facing challenges, we could take practical steps. To better persevere may be memorizing this verse, praying more like Daniel, reading the Bible, volunteering, or connecting here at the Crossing. And wherever you're at, the best place to start is just to remember that there is a God who longs to protect, guide, and support you. And because of this, there isn't nothing to fear and should encourage all of us to persevere through all the challenges and obstacles that life will bring. And by focusing on what Daniel shares in his story, and by actively nurturing our faith, we can develop the resilience needed to face life's obstacles.